think right now, obviously, in my personal opinion, that it's always best to let the states to decide what's best for its people. But I can tell you that there are certain states around the country, like California, like Kentucky, that are really going above and beyond, and in my opinion, operating police states that are violating the rights of the American people, are going really against the Constitution. Yeah. And frankly, in places like Florida, where we do have a high concentration of veterans, when you have places shut down to where people can't even exercise, that creates a mental health issue. And you do have a study that came out from the University of Washington that stated that Florida is now past its peak. Sorry, go ahead, Charles.
No, Florida's getting high marks after a lot of criticisms a couple of weeks ago. And great talking to you. And while the southern states are leading the charge of reopening America, South Carolina alone, some stores are reopening. In fact, last night, that's also Georgia laying out their guidelines, and they're talking about restaurants coming back as soon as next week. Tennessee, they're laying out the groundwork, and they're saying a vast majority of businesses will be open by May 1st. So could the success of these states jumpstarting their states actually help to jumpstart the rest of the nation? I want to bring in Independent Women's Forum Senior Policy Analyst Kelsey Bolar. Kelsey, many also are equating reopening the economy, letting people go back to work with basic American liberties. And they do worry, to Anna's point a moment ago, that states like California, where they're busy actually covering up skate parks with sand rather than formulating plans to reopen, that they're misguided right now.
Well, hi, Charles. It's great to be here. If you look at polls, the vast majority of Americans have supported the types of restrictions that we've seen come down by the federal and state governments to protect Americans from COVID-19. That said, these restrictions need to be reasonable. Americans only have so much tolerance. And when they see the number of cases continually drop to the point where in some rural parts of the country there hardly are any, if any, cases, they reasonably want to start reopening the economy. And I think a lot of these protests that we've seen kind of being mocked and scolded by the media actually came as a result of a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing from Manhattan media personalities sitting in their apartments with their remote jobs, and they're still able to get paid lecturing the country about why they need to stay home for an indefinite amount of time, when in reality all over the country, small town Iowa, restaurant workers are unemployed, and right. So are farmers and so forth. And these are areas where you don't need to have a lot of personal interaction in order to get parts of the economy back moving again.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, being able to work from home at a full salary, particularly a multi-million-dollar salary, is a privilege, and sometimes some people forget that's not everyone. By the way, speaking of being holed up in the home, it's not easy. Paul, Kelsey, I tweeted about my wife and I. You should see how many knives and forks we use every day. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But on top of that, yesterday my SUV had to be towed. It wouldn't start. I mean, it'd been sitting there for so long, and I said, this is the perfect proxy, if you will, or example of the U.S. economy. I mean, if we don't get in there and start it back up, it won't start when we try it down the road.
Absolutely, Charles. I saw you tweet that picture, and I thought I better go check on my car and make sure that it's still working. Maybe our fellow Americans should too. But look, again, it's unfortunate that politics continue even in the wake of a pandemic. But what we need to realize is that reopening the economy is not and should not be a left or right issue. This is affecting Americans across the board, and in areas where we are able to enter the phase one that the Trump administration laid out for how we can safely going about doing this, we absolutely should begin taking those steps while protecting the most vulnerable among us.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing the president said, that's 100% right. This economy was not built to be shut down. Kelsey, it's a pleasure seeing you. Thank you. Meanwhile, folks, the May crude contract, that oil contract, well, just stopped trading moments ago. Crude oil now about $47 to $10 a barrel. This after yesterday's more than 300% drop in value. I want to bring in Canary LLC CEO Dan Eberhard to help break this down for us. Dan, you're in the industry. You see
this money for the loans that need to go out. This just breaking, and I'm sure you're glad to see it, but it sure took a long time to get to this point.
Absolutely. We have gone through 14 years worth of SBA loans in 14 days to give you a sense of the need that's out there for our small businesses. And for the last 14 days, Speaker Pelosi and Senate Democrats have been playing politics with people's livelihoods. And that's a shame. I'm glad that they seem to have reached some form of agreement because the need is really great out there. And I hope we'll also see some substantive improvements to the program. For example, the eligibility requirements were a little murky in some cases. There was no disincentive, for example, for healthy businesses that have been unaffected by the program to apply for the program and potentially rob resources from the smaller businesses who need it more. And so I'm glad to see we got a deal. I look forward to reading the details of that deal. And I think it's time for us in Congress to go back to work. I can think of no more essential business than us, the elected representatives of the American people, trying to help our constituents out in this time of crisis.
Do you think it's safe and a good thing to go back to the Capitol? Do you think that Congress should return? Because you guys have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think it won't be business as usual. Obviously, we'll have to keep the Capitol closed to visitors, which is something we should have done a long time before mid-March. I think the members who perhaps have underlying health conditions could be encouraged to stay home. But the fact is we don't have a thoroughly vetted proxy voting or remote voting procedure in place. And I really think just a fundamental principle, if we're asking Americans to sacrifice, if we're asking those on the front lines, our healthcare workers, our first responders, to risk themselves in order to help the country, we in Congress should be willing to lead by example. And I think we can do it in a safe way if we exercise some common sense and discipline.
Tell me a little bit about what's going on in your state. I'm particularly interested and concerned about America's farmers and ranchers out there, and I know the dairy farmers, they're in a little bit of dire straits right now.
Yeah, milk prices have been low for years now, so the dairy industry was already struggling, and this just adds another burden. And so it's why it's imperative that we find a way, as soon as it's responsible to do so and practically possible based on the enhanced data we have right now, to start thawing out our economy, to start reopening our economy. And that's not going to be something we can do with a one-size-fits-all top-down policy from D.C. or even a statewide policy from Madison, Wisconsin. It's going to have to be from the bottom up, city by city, village by village, county by county, in order to figure out how we start to get our economy moving, because we may be able to pass a replenishment of the Paycheck Protection Program that helps Wisconsin farmers, but there simply aren't enough federal dollars out there to cover the cost of a prolonged shutdown. So it really is important that we start to think through the next phase of this effort.
We certainly have to do that. Mike Gallagher, the congressman from Wisconsin, thanks for joining us today. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
And Joe Biden hauling in a whole lot of campaign cash in March, nearly $50 million, making it his best month of fundraising to date. Peter Ducey is live in Arlington, Virginia. Peter, this had to be welcome news for the Biden campaign.
Definitely, especially, Dana, now that Joe Biden is saying it's not as satisfying for him when the whole way that he's campaigning is connecting with people through a webcam. But being stuck behind the computer screen is not hurting his fundraising. You said it, $46 million. That is his best month of the cycle, and it's more than the Trump campaign made in March. But there are two big caveats. One, cash on hand. The Trump campaign casts a $70 million shadow over the Biden campaign there. And two, the Trump re-election effort has been aided by the RNC, which has raised hundreds of millions of dollars for Trump during his first term, all while the DNC was having to stay neutral as they whittled down a 24-person field. And now the presumptive nominee, Biden, is looking for a running mate. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer just told the Washington Post she has not yet been asked for vetting documents. Stacey Abrams is pushing herself for the job, but says she has not talked to Biden about it. And the former VP suggested last night he would pick Michelle Obama in a heartbeat if she wanted the job. But as these ideas form, the Bidens are just trying to stay busy.
Everybody's watching this Tiger King show.
Yeah.
So I turned it on and we watched about 20 minutes. And Pop looks at me and said, "What are we watching?" I mean, it was like so crazy.
And that represents yet another policy difference between Biden and Trump. We don't know if President Trump has watched The Tiger King, but we do know that he said he would look at a pardon for the subject of the docuseries, Joe Exotic. Dana?
Yeah, Trump played that card very well indeed on the old Tiger King. Thank you, Peter Ducey. And a Fox News alert now, a South Korean media outlet reporting that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is recovering after undergoing a cardiovascular surgical procedure. But there are also reports that his condition is grave, explaining why he wasn't seen at any public celebration on what was the nation's biggest holiday. Rich Edson is live at the State Department with more on this. Rich?
Good afternoon, Dana. And U.S. officials are trying to determine Kim Jong-un's condition with all these reports that he's seriously ill. That's unclear, but this is what they're looking at and what we do know. Kim's last public appearance was April 11th. He was presiding over a Politburo meeting on state television. The next day, according to that unverified South Korean report, Kim had a cardiovascular procedure. Later that week, Kim missed the celebration of his grandfather's birth. He's in poor shape, he's obese, a heavy smoker, whose father and grandfather died of cardiovascular disease. Beyond that, officials acknowledge North Korea is a hard intelligence target where much of the information can be inflated or just wrong.
You know, we're watching the reports closely, and what we'll have to see is everyone here knows the North Koreans are parsimonious with the information that they put out about many things, especially when it comes to their leaders. And so
Kim only has young children, and there is no clear successor. Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, is a close advisor to the dictator, and early last month she issued a statement under her name for the first time. U.S. intelligence took notice of that. Now, for years, the U.S. government has been planning for the potential collapse of the Kim regime, but for more than 70 years, it has persisted through the fall of the Soviet Union, the death of two leaders, and massive famine throughout the country. Dana?
Rich Edson at the State Department for us. Thank you. America's truckers still on the roads, but they're facing their own struggles during this crisis. Coming up, we'll talk to the head of a major trucking company about how to keep drivers on the front lines safe.